I have started the recording and I will mute all the participants just now. Okay, there goes. Madhu, over to you. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Unmute, please, Madhu.
Yeah. A very good evening and a good morning to everybody to the 9th session of the Family Discussion Group. We will be talking about thinking and talking about design. Design as a concept has come into the lexion and academic discussions and chat things in the mid-20th century. It's not as if the design was never there or was a new concept. It's been with us since the dawn of history. If you go back to the Indus Valley civilization times, the Indus Valley cities, the design there, as is aware, can be seen in Dholavira in Kutch, or in the bigger cities in Mohenjo-daro and others in Pakistan, where these things of urban design. But somehow design as a concept fell off post the Industrial Revolution, when discoveries in science and technology made design somewhat take a backseat. And Henry Ford is very famously reputed to be talking about when he's talking with his motor car, that there is no point in asking people what they want or how they want it designed, because they'll want a better horse. And they can have any car they want, any design they want, as long as they take a black motor T. So that was the thing. But in the Second World War, the start was something which shocked and amazed everyone. The First World War had been a battle of equals, and the two groups had battled themselves to exhaustion along a front line which ranged several hundred kilometers, but which did not vary much over the 4-year period. But the Second World War started and seemed to end within weeks, because in a span of less than 4 months, the German army, in the strike called Blitzkrieg, which was basically unifying the weapons of the First World War, the tank, the aircraft, and the machine guns, armed soldiers on armored personal carriers, rampaging through Europe and walking through defenses which had been thought impregnable earlier. This shocked the military mind, and concept of design or need to design things came into being. Ironically, over 2 millennia before, in the Mahabharata, the concept of design and design formations granting invincibility was also in the 18-day campaign, where each of the armies on each of the days tried to adopt different patterns and different organizations to outwit the other. And the most invincible was supposed to be the famous Chakravyuh, which no one could smash except Arjun, and to some extent, half extent, his son Abhimanyu, who could get in but can't get out. But people had forgotten that. People had forgotten in the glory of the Industrial Revolution that patterns of organization can change the quality of what is being attempted. This thought process we will discuss in this session, which has been choreographed by Purvi Mathur, who's an alumnus of the National Institute of Design and the Savannah College of Art and Design. She calls herself a design practitioner, specializing in design thinking, research, strategy, and innovation. As a former co-founder of Hira Global Tech, she conceptualized Autonomous, a biotech-based wearables for personal safety. This wearable was selected as one of the semi-finalists in the famous Anu and Naveen Jain's Women's Prize in 2018. Purvi was recently invited for a pep talk about her work in the area of women's safety by the World Design Organization in collaboration with the UN Women's Asia Pacific. She continues to explore the potential of contextual research and design methodologies to understand, analyze, and creatively solve complex problems, especially in the field of social compact, and to solve the problem of how to explain to a very heterogeneous family group, she has pulled together with Siddharth Verma. And Gopal Verma is quite a character. Huh? Look at his CV, is very impressive. He is a co-founder of Brainstem. It's a STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, and maths mentoring program for high school students, developing 21st century skills in critical thinking and problems. With a strong focus on gender equity and access to all, Brainstem has been recognized to be one of the most innovative STEM mentoring programs in Australia. As a result, he is the STEM Outreach Committee member of the Royal Society of Victoria, an ambassador of Science Works Museum in Melbourne, and an advisor for youth mental health program at the Victorian Government Health Promotion Foundation. He is an obsessive golfer and a select malt consumer. These two have designed the program, and they have roped in two speakers who were reluctant and quite shy about appearing in the beginning, as you all have noticed. Chandraveer Sarandas will be talking, and he is a former CEO and co-founder of the educational and stationery products business of ITC. In his 35-year corporate career, he has led and scaled both B2B and B2C businesses. As CEO ITC Stationery Products, he was credited with making Classmate India's largest and fastest growing student stationery brand. He is currently an angel investor with the Keiretsu Forum and has invested in 20 startups across sectors. He is a CEO coach with the Coaching Foundation India and a mentor with Will Grow Innovation Foundation. This is India's largest social enterprise incubator. He earned his MBA from IIM Bangalore and was a BTech in mechanical engineering from IIT Kanpur. He is passionate about helping entrepreneurs and professionals succeed. When they roped him in, to Ranu's surprise, Chan got after him and badgered him to join. And a stiff rearguard fight, and I think Ranbir Sarandas lost it very gracefully, ceding inch by inch, and agreed to share his biodata, which reads that he has lived in 5 countries, worked in 25, and traveled to 72 countries, all the 7 continents. He's been to 5 schools, 3 countries, and experienced different educational systems, the American, the Indian, and the British. He graduated from St. Stephen's College in 1971. He started corporate life in 1972 and was an entrepreneur at age 39 in 1990. He says that he wants to work 2 more years because he's already worked 48 years and wants to make it around 68. I don't know why he doesn't want to touch 70. Over this time, he has designed, led, or developed 400 projects, including about, I think, 40 plus cities in several domains, globally and in India, mostly involving technology and sustainability, and has developed his own businesses in India, UK, US, Singapore, and Slovenia. He has been a guest speaker in many universities and other fora in India, China, Europe, UK, and the US. He is also a part of the 20-member executive committee of the erstwhile Green Growth Leaders in Copenhagen, which was mandated to engage with 3 to 500 mayors from global cities on sustainable development twice a year. And he's passionate about no repeat comfortable travel. What is that here? History, energy, technology, nature, food, and whiskey. He's inspired by little things in nature and creates designs. So with that, I will hand over to Purvi, who's choreographing the entire thing and conducting it. And all the best, Purvi.
Namaste, everyone. Thank you, Madhu Bhai Saab, for introducing the session and the panelists today. I'll just start sharing my screen so we can begin. Can you see?
Yes, Purvi, go ahead.
Is the screen? Okay, great. Yeah, so before I begin, I want to thank Ranu Tauji for thinking about this fantastic idea of getting the family together to meet, learn, laugh, and get to know each other. Really, over the past few months, we have covered such an exciting and vast range of subjects and pulled out subject matter experts from varied fields, all within the family. It just goes to show how accomplished, diverse, and vibrant the Das family is. So when we got down to think in a very design thinking manner, who is our end user for this talk? I'll admit, for a moment there, we were a little nervous. How do you design a session for an audience that is so wide, so varied, so smart, and so talented? But then, if you look at design, it's not very different. It is wide, varied, and vibrant. From the moment we wake up until the moment we wake up, we experience design in some way or the other, be it a toothbrush, the subway route we decide to take, the Zomato meal we order conveniently, or the show we watch before bed. Design is such a fundamental part of our lives. And unlike the popular belief, design is not purely about aesthetics or creating products or objects. Design is a process. And to be more specific, it is a strategic problem solving process that harnesses creativity and innovation to bridge the gap between what is and what could be. This forms the basis of design thinking. Very simply put, design thinking is a method or an approach to solve a problem. The user is central to this approach, and understanding the needs and context by observation and empathy is a key factor. This helps one define and reframe the problem crisply based on what one has understood from the user's point of view and context. Here, one can challenge the initial problem itself or the assumptions and biases one might have. It draws from a toolkit of creative processes or activities where play is an essential ingredient to let loose and brainstorm all kinds of ideas, even if they're crazy. A hands-on approach, the process moves quickly to create rapid prototypes in the form of rough mock-ups or even role plays, with intent to test and improvise a proposed solution. While this seems very linear, design thinking is in fact an iterative process of going back and forth, improvising constantly based on results to come up with the best possible solution that serves the need of the user. The process has many variants, but they all essentially embody the same principle. Interestingly, over the past few years, design thinking as an approach has gained traction across a multitude of contexts and is no longer limited to product innovation. Through our discussion today, we thought it best to give you a sample bite of the many flavors of this process, including a look at how nature, design thinks so beautifully and with perfection. So with that, I hand it over to Siddharth Bhaiya, who has been using the process rigorously over the years through his program with high school students and educators. Over to you, Bhaiya.
Purvi, thank you so much for that. Can you all see my screen?
No, I have to stop sharing.
Okay.
But I'm looking for my mouse.
Okay. Let me know when
Could you
can.
do that as a co-host?
Yeah, can you see my screen now?
I can see your face, which is basically Purvi's slide.
Okay, so I think Purvi has to stop sharing and then I can start sharing.
Yeah, Purvi, can you?
There we are. Yes, but yes, I'm trying to do that.
Okay.
But I can't find my mouse. There we go.
Okay,
I think I've
that's
done it
better.
now.
I think that's sort of worked now. And can you see that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
So you can see the using design thinking to unleash your inner child. Okay. Well, look, everyone, good evening. And Purvi, thank you so much for setting the stage for what I believe is going to be a very interesting conversation on design thinking. And hopefully by the end of this session, after listening to all the speakers, you will be able to appreciate the capability of design thinking. In some ways, find new ways to solve problems with fun solutions, and of course, get some tricks or tips to apply design thinking in your everyday life. As it is customary in Australia, and it's a tradition that I got accustomed to since I've been here for the last 20 years, is at the beginning of each presentation here, we acknowledge the traditional owners or the custodians on the land on which we gather. Um, the Indigenous Australians or the Aboriginal Australians are the world's oldest civilization, longest single continuous civilization of over 50,000 years. Um, they are recognized to be one of the earliest inventors, the world's first bakers, the invention of the boomerang. Many of the hunting, farming, fishing tools were invented by the Indigenous Australians. Um, the map that you see on the right-hand side is most unlike the map of Australia that you would have seen across the world. This is the map of Indigenous Australia, and the different colors are the different tribes that call themselves home. So I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather. In my case, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. But even more importantly, it is fortuitous that we are all gathered here as a part of the Das family group from all parts of the world, across different generations. And in some ways, this coming together of people from different walks of life and recognizing the work that we are all doing is important. And it happens every fortnight. And thank you so much to Ranu Chacha for organizing that. So design thinking, as it was mentioned in the introduction earlier, Shilpa, my wife, and I started Brainstem almost 5 years back. Brainstem is bringing research and innovation to STEM. And we've been running a mentoring program in STEM for high school students, doing a lot of work around gender equity, STEM mentoring, and helping students find their voice. And when we run these sort of programs with the students, we ask them the question, or we encourage them to ask the question as to what does better look like. Because almost everything in this world can be made better. And if we accept the way it is, then we obviously accepting a life of concessions. And so we always encourage them to think about what more can they do, how can they make things better. And design thinking at its heart is an integral part of making things better. And as it was mentioned earlier, there are different models of design thinking. It is a process of creative problem solving. And if there are a couple of things that I would like you to take from my session this evening are two things. One is that, as Purvi was mentioning, it is a 5-stage process. It begins with empathizing or understanding who we are trying to solve the problem for, understanding that. We then define a problem that is worth solving. We then go on to the next stage of coming up with ideas to solve that problem. We then find the best possible solution and we make it, we design it, we implement it, we build a prototype, we take it back to the user to test it. And each stage, as you can see with the arrows going back and forth, is an iterative process. And at each of the stages, either you are diverging or you're converging, either you're creating choices or you're making choices, either you are building a pool full of ideas or you are selecting from a pool of ideas or thought bubbles. So that's at the core of the two simple concepts of design thinking. As mentioned, the model that we use is the one that is used by Stanford. It is the Stanford D School or the Hasso-Plattner School of Design. And my take on that is that there are two different approaches to that 5-stage process. One is an outcome-based approach, and the other one is a linkages-based approach. The outcome-based approach is what we are traditionally used to. That is, it's an end-to-end project. It is a design sprint. It is a design thinking workshop. It can go from 90 minutes to a couple of days to a few days. That's the one where either you are doing what is called as a temporal approach, where you take an existing process, an existing problem, an existing solution in place. You look at the gaps in that process and you try and fill those gaps with a better solution so that the entire process becomes better. The spatial approach is the one where you look at a problem or a situation and you look at a parallel example of something similar that you can draw upon as examples or ideas and apply that to the existing problem to make it better. From our point of view and from our experience when we are working with schools, we are increasingly seeing design thinking or problem solving or problem-based learning in the school curriculum. It is taught across the entire year level. You normally work in groups. Startups are using it, companies are using it. You are using design thinking projects for mini sort of projects as well. And we worked across a range of these sort of solutions. You can look at it from a start local, think global perspective. You can start with a community-based problem, see what affects your own local community, draw inspirations from the Sustainable Development Goals, see how it connects with a much bigger global purpose or a solution, or go the other way around. Start with something big and see how that applies and is relevant to you from a community point of view. So that's the outcome-based approach of design thinking. And there's a whole sea full of ideas and options and permutations and combinations available. The linkages-based approach, which is where we do a little bit more work with schools, is what we call as working on the building blocks. Young kids who are in their early teens, year 8, year 9, year 10, that sort of age group, which is what our target audience is. If you throw them into a design thinking end-to-end project, it can sometimes be too complex. The challenge with design thinking is the fact that it is a very simplistic model, in which then gives the user the assumption that, oh, this is too easy, I can do this. But as they would understand that it is a practice, and the more you practice it, the better you get at it. And so if we throw them into this design thinking pool of empathy and definition and ideation and prototyping and testing and expect them to do all that in 2 hours or half a day, it is way too much for them to digest that. So we break it down. We break it down into different blocks of empathy or definition or brainstorming or ideation or prototyping. And we empower and we build on that skill set. And once that becomes better, then we can go back to an outcome-based approach and do an entire end-to-end design thinking process. So I want to tell you 2 stories or share with you 2 stories or instances of what we've come across as a design thinking activity and what came out of that, and some surprising outcomes that came out of that as well. So as we know, the first stage of design thinking is the empathy stage. And this is really, I would say, the younger the audience, the newer the person to the design thinking concept is probably one of the hardest steps, because you have to sort of get into the other person's shoes. You have to understand and share the same feelings the other person feels. We have to talk about empathy and not sympathy. Who are we trying to solve the problem for? And this is where we are using techniques like building an empathy map. We're doing surveys. We are doing the ask the 5 why questions. We're doing things like show me why you do this or how you do this. Tell me what are you doing and why are you doing it. We're gathering data from the user. We are analyzing the data. We're building on their experiences, and we're trying to capture as much information as they can. In fact, there's a great article in the New York Times on how do you strengthen or build your empathy muscle. And people like Brené Brown and Roman Krasnick and Leslie Jameson, they've all written about how or what can we do to build our empathy muscle. And I encourage you, I can sort of share the link with you at the end of the session of how can we build our empathy muscle just in our everyday lives. And one of the steps that follows on from the empathy stage is what we call as the definition stage, which is where we identify a problem worth solving. And what we do is that sometimes when we are looking at identifying what the problem is, it's very hard to pinpoint who that problem is for, because it's very hard to design a solution for one person, because then it's a very myopic view of the design thinking process. So we work on a concept called as building a persona, which is where you build a fictitious character or a person after interviewing a range of users, and you pick up the common traits across the range of users that you have spent time in the empathy stage. And this is a fun activity, which is so we did a workshop with a entire class of year 8 students, so about 12, 13 years old girls at a school in Melbourne, about 160 students. And the problem statement or the challenge was, how do we take care of our elderly population? and each day was a different theme. And on this day, we were talking about health and well-being of the elderly population. So when we asked them to build a persona, we it's fun because they put this piece of paper on the floor. You lie down on top of that. You do an outline of the person. You put them up on the wall. You give that person a name, an age, their family, where do they live, what food do they eat, what work do they do, what hobbies do they have. They build a whole persona. And it turns out that one of the teams built the persona of Santa Claus. Now, I don't know about you, but I know that Santa Claus is a real person. And for all you non-believers out there who don't believe in the magic of Christmas and who believe Santa Claus is not real, I hope by the end of today's session, I will be able to change your mind. But let's play along, for argument's sake. Santa Claus lives in a very remote location, is a very harsh environment, is quite isolated, perhaps lonely. We see him only once a year at Christmas, who travels with reindeers, and doesn't use public transport, all of those sort of traits. So when the girls built this persona of Santa Claus, the question was, is there anybody else like Santa Claus who could use this solution? And then we delved a bit deeper and we thought, hang on a second. I mean, if it's a very small place, which is the smallest town in Australia? And so then we went down this journey of looking at a town called Cooladi, which is the smallest town in Australia with a population of 3 people. 3 people, a husband, wife, and a mother-in-law. And when I was reading the article, it turns out that they live quite happily. They worked out the magic of getting along quite well. In a very small town, in one building, which is a service station, it's a milk bar, it's a grocery store, it's a post office, all in one building, which is the Foxtrap. Or we could look at one of the most remote, harshest environments in Australia, which is a community called Kiwirrkura, which is in Western Australia. The nearest airport is in Alice Spring, which is 700 kilometers away. That's like Delhi to Udaipur. The nearest port is Port Hedland, which is 1,200 kilometers away, which is Delhi to Nasik. Imagine nothing in between. And the nearest biggest city is Perth, which is over 2,000 kilometers away. That's Delhi to Chennai, and imagine just barren land between Delhi and Chennai. That's how remote this community is. So clearly, if we're able to find a solution for Santa Claus to travel, to connect, and and live a much happier life, then they would be able to solve solutions. You would be able to solve solutions for a population like that. But then if you dig a bit deeper into that, it looks like Santa Claus Village in Finland is about 140 kilometers from the North Pole Arctic Circle. Turns out there's actually a city called Rovaniemi, which is the official hometown of Santa Claus. And if you go down even further, the population of Rovaniemi is 63,000 people. So it turns out that Santa Claus is not a lonely old man living all by himself. The point I'm trying to make here is that, first of all, Santa Claus is real, of course. You would know by now. But the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes when you go down the journey of challenging your assumptions, challenging your biases, and digging a bit deeper into following through on a perhaps concept or an idea that you thought was not possible, leads you to a whole new world of discovery. So while the learning in this case might not specifically have been to design a whole new solution for Santa Claus, what they did discover in that process was that sometimes coming up with the craziest ideas will take you down, most often than not, down a path of learning and discovery more often than not. So assuming you've done the empathy stage, you come up with a persona, you come up with a problem worth solving, and then you go to the next stage, which is the ideation stage, which is the fun stage. This is the stage where we are coming up with a whole range of ideas. This is where we are using things like the impact effort matrix. We're doing sketch noting of how to draw, how to make toast. We're playing games like the yes and no but game. And of course, we're doing brainstorming. Now, we all know what brainstorming is. We get a bunch of people together in a room around a table. We give them an idea or a question, and you say, think and come up with ideas. And that's the biggest problem with brainstorming, because there's a report or research that came out of UCLA by Dr. Dan Siegel, and he spoke about that an average person hears the word no 400 times a day. So by the time you're 1 year old, you've heard no about 146,000 times. By the time you're 10 years old, 1.4 million times. By the time you're 25, 3.65 million times on an average, you've heard the word no. I wasn't even brave enough to put any more bar charts for the age beyond 25 because I would shudder to think what the number would look like. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we get so accustomed to the older we grow to hearing the word no and to rejecting things because we heard no so often that we start living a life of less risk. Our lived experiences keep coming in our own ways. We stop sharing. We stop having the confidence in sharing unfinished work. We get comfortable with the average or the minimalistic instead of embracing the chaos. Imperfection is a risk and not an opportunity. See, what happens is at the end of the workshop that we ran for the girls from the school, we have this presentation day. So we had 160 girls, their parents, their teachers, their friends, all in this big auditorium. So there's about 200-300 people who were there. And we had selected some teams to come and do some presentations and talk about what their whole journey was through the process. And what we found was that one of the girls, she put her hand up and she said, I used to be afraid of old people, but now I'm not. Now imagine this 13-year-old girl has the courage to put her hand up in front of 300 people and say that she used to be afraid of old people and did not know how to talk to them. But after coming to a workshop like this, and after going through and embracing her vulnerability and sitting through a brainstorming session and going through a design thinking session, she was able to come out of that shell and said, I will now go and have a much more meaningful and wonderful conversation with my grandparents and other people. I will go and visit my local aged care home and go and talk to some people there. So the learning by itself is not just about the process, but also about what you learn across as you pick up these nuggets as you go along on that journey. And of course, after that is the prototyping stage and the testing stage, which sort of follows through after that. Now, design thinking, of course, as a concept is not just, what is applied in schools. And as you would hear from the other speakers, it is applied in other parts of life as well. But I want to share one more example with you of what's the Design Factory Global Network, which is a collection of universities and research organizations around the world across 40 different cities, where, for example, one of the universities in Melbourne, Swinburne, which is who we partner with, they are part of the Design Factory Global Network. If a customer went to them and said, here's a problem that we would like you to solve for us, they would then select other Design Factory Global Network partners in other cities around the world. Swinburne would then do the empathy stage of the project. They would then hand over to, let's say, Singapore, who would then work on the definition stage, who would then hand over to London to do the ideation stage, hand over to New York to work on the prototyping stage, and bring it back to Melbourne for the testing stage, if it required an international input into a project of that size. So you can see that collaboration doesn't necessarily have to be in your own school, in your own office, in your own workplace. It can happen internationally as well. Because creativity, curiosity, and play are, I think, the three key pillars or components of solving some of the most challenging problems in the world. And they are an integral part of design thinking. Pablo Picasso says that, all children are born artists. Problem is how we remain as artists as we grow up. And that's, as we grow older, we stop having fun, we stop playing, we start getting more bland. And how do we make sure that we continue to be fearless? How do we make sure that we remain playful and we keep on asking the question? And as I leave the session, the thought I want to leave you with is, as you go about your everyday lives, think about whatever you're doing, what does better look like? So let's play. Let's start playing more often, and let's start unleashing our inner child. And now I'll hand it over to Chand Bhaiya, who will talk about how design thinking is being applied in the corporate world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bantu. And thank you to Purvi. Thank you to Madhu for the introduction. Great. So I'm here today really to share my experience with working with a whole lot of startups. As you may have heard, I am now an angel investor, and I'm a kind of an evangelist for the startup ecosystem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through two of my startups and share with you how design thinking can be applied in this area and how design thinking helps in figuring out what is a very effective stakeholder centric model, right? So it begins with inspiration, and then it goes on to ideation, and then on to implementation, right? So all startups start with an inspiration. So they're trying to solve some problem, or they're trying to, win some opportunity. So let me share with you the first startup that I'd like to talk about is called Virohan Healthcare. They are in the skilling of students for what is called paramedical skills. And at the end of this skilling program, a job is guaranteed. Now, this is wonderful because what they do is they reach out to typically tier 2, tier 3 towns across the country, and they pick up school pass outs, people, boys and girls who finished class 12. And at that stage, they go and so let's look at a situation where the results are out and these students are figuring out what to do next. Okay. So a Virohan poster is of course made available in all their schools. And then a Shiksha Mitra from the company actually goes and visits schools in a catchment area and tries to enroll some of these students onto the Virohan platform. And many of them, are quite happy to sign up and to try this whole experience. So a number of these students sign up on the Virohan platform. Then there is a process of screening, and eventually some of them are onboarded onto the Virohan healthcare program. And what happens is once they are onboarded, it's a paid program. So they have to find the fees to pay, and it's not very cheap because at the end of the day, the company also needs to, generate a financial return as well as, provide these skills and provide a job. So the student comes in, and in order to fund the program, the company has tied up with banks and NBFCs who immediately give these students a loan to fund the program. So there's a 1-year program and there's a 2-year program and so on. The entire curriculum is run using technology. So the day the student enrolls, the student has access to the curriculum. The attendance is automatically monitored. The class sessions are held. There is a facilitator. You answer questions using your smartphone. And in this process, you get better and better at becoming a kind of a healthcare technician, right? The other interesting part is that medical equipment companies like GE, like Siemens, like Philips, provide their medical equipment to this company free of cost because these trainees get an opportunity to work on these machines and then get certified as machine operators, right? So the medical equipment company has been enrolled as well. At the end of the program, in the last phase, which is the last 3 months in a 1-year program or the last 6 months in a 2-year program, there is a process of internship. And this is paid internship. Who pays the internship? The company, not the hospital or the healthcare center, which hires the intern. Okay. Where does the money come from? It's part of the total fee structure, right? So imagine in the last 3 months, the student then goes to the hospital or to the healthcare facility and actually deploys all the learning, you know, at on the ground, you know, and works with patients, works with machines, and gains further practical knowledge and confidence in this whole process. At the end of this internship, the establishment where the intern is working gives the intern a job. And, you know, starting salaries for technicians, so these could be X-ray technicians, they could be pathology assistants and so on. So it starts at 15,000 plus. So imagine, you know, a student from a tier 3 town coming into this program for 1 year and ending up with a 15,000 rupee a month job. So the learning from this entire exercise is that while developing this model, we look at all the stakeholders. So we've looked at the student. So what does the student get? The student gets skills and the student gets a job. Okay. The company earns a financial return because the fees come in. And of course, there are expenses, there are costs of rolling out this program nationally. There are franchisees, which the company has appointed in different parts of the country, with whom there is, you know, revenue sharing, and that also happens, right? So the franchisee also gets to win in this process. The medical equipment companies who have sort of engaged with this company also stand to gain, because their machines are the ones that the interns are trained on, and eventually it helps their cause as well. The banks and the NBFCs are connected to the company, and the lending that they do, the recovery is done automatically from the salaries that these students earn after placement. The hospital and the healthcare facility gets talent which they are desperately short of, and they get a good look at this talent because during the internship period, there is a 3-6 month kind of oversight, and so they get ready talent. And the investors, you know, people like me and other investors see that this is a growing company. Revenues have been very, very positively increasing. They have already now got funding from the next set of investors. So just an example of how when you think of a company and you think of all the stakeholders, you know, and how design thinking can be applied here to make all stakeholders succeed. So this is the first example. The second example is more of a kind of a product example, and it's from the agri sector. It's I'm going to hold up something here, which you may be wondering what it is. It's actually a piece of bamboo. Can you see this? Yeah. So this is, you know, high girth bamboo. It's actually a grass which is grown in large parts of the world, but in India now, through this company, which is called Artisan Agrotech, the company has sort of embarked on a massive program of agri-based, we call it forestry because it's not technically a forest product, it's an agri product. So at this stage, there are about 10,000 farmers in Madhya Pradesh who are planting saplings of high girth bamboo. So what's the big proposition here? The proposition here is that the farmers who have been used to, let's say, the traditional Kharif and Rabi crops and are earning a certain income on a per hectare basis, by planting bamboo, they are able to multiply their income 3 to 4 times. Okay? But this takes time because for a bamboo to get harvested, the first crop takes about 4 years, right? But thereafter, the harvest is done in perpetuity. Now, what is the application of this? The application of this bamboo is that it is eventually processed into what is called a wood substitute, a very simple substitute. So I'm holding a plank in front of me, a little piece of, this is made from bamboo. It looks nothing like bamboo, but this is after processing, right? So, and from this processed precision engineered board, as they call it, you can actually make all kinds of furniture products, doors, windows, finished furniture. And believe it or not, this company has a tie-up and has received already a letter of intent from IKEA Global in Sweden. So imagine a situation where a Swedish giant like IKEA is interested in sourcing bamboo-based furniture from India, which is a substitute for timber. And in this process, there is a huge development of an agri-business wherein, as I mentioned, there are currently 10,000 farmers, and over the next 3 years, it will get to about 100,000 farmers who will multiply their income. So, and this process also works very interestingly because the farmer does the planting, the harvesting is done by a village unit, which is part of what is called a farmer producer organization. And that farmer producer organization does what is called the cutting, they do the primary processing, which is splitting the bamboo and stuff like that, sending it then to the company's factory. And the company then does the processing, converts the bamboo into precision engineered boards, which are then converted into furniture. And that furniture goes to IKEA, not just in India, but IKEA globally. So this is the whole end-to-end program in the case of this agri company. And we've seen how the various stakeholders, the customer, IKEA gets a wood substitute at a slightly lower price, okay? They also do local sourcing in the process. The farmer grows income 3 to 4 times compared to traditional crops. The environment is significantly greened in the process. The farmer producer organization cooperative, which does the primary processing, gains, and so on. The state governments and the central governments are hugely supportive because you can understand there is a national and a state level mandate to enhance farmer income. And this is a fantastic way of doing it through a very non-traditional kind of crop. And so, you know, the fun about this, both the healthcare services company and the agri company, is that you being involved in the very early stage in these companies, you get a chance to work with the co-founders and run sessions with them on ideation and help them along this journey. So that's really what I wanted to share in terms of my experience of working with 2 startups in using principles of design thinking. I will now like to hand over to Ranu Chacha, and I must say that a couple of years ago, Ranu Chacha came down to Chennai, where I was based, and did an outstanding presentation on, well, I won't talk about the presentation, but I persuaded him to try and do an action replay for this audience. So over to Ranu Chacha now.
Thank you, Chand. By the way, that was brilliant. Very well done. So it is true that I was persuaded by Chand, but it is not entirely true because I was arm twisted by Chand to be part of this. I had no intention of being part of this. But anyway, I am an accidental designer. I was never trained to be a designer, and I've been a designer for 40 plus years in various fields. Let me talk about nature. It's everything in nature is a miracle in design, especially the little things of incredible complexity and beauty. But where do you get the inspiration? You get the inspiration from everywhere. And anything, everything, limitless. You can design anything, but it helps to focus. If you define a purpose, an application, or an ambition. And for example, it would be very complex to design contact lenses for chickens, but is it useful because she's going to go into the tandoor anyway? If you move across trenches, so you have to have an ambition as well in the design. If you move across trenches, silos, disciplines, and away from your comfort zone, so that you can borrow elements from several domains and fuse them into a single form. The great industrial revolution of the late 19th and the early 20th century happened precisely because of this. And it has been followed by countless development revolutions since then, and some of them have been very destructive. Let me take this example. This is a Sukhoi 30 fighter jet. The Russian engineers looked at the eagle and tried to mimic its flight. The first fighter to have this ability to virtually stop in midair, change directions quickly. And it has what is called, both the Eagle and the Sukhoi have embedded dynamic stabilization. They all work on the same principles, both these, the Eagle and the fighter. Same basic building blocks, distributed embedded intelligence, defined multi-level communication protocols. Next, please, Bantu. So everybody thinks that this is the tallest building in the world. It is indeed the tallest man-made building existing on planet Earth, but it is not the tallest. This is the tallest built structure in the world relative to who built it. This has been built by ants. They have built an anthill as high as 3,000 times their own size, as opposed to the Burj, which is 510 times the size. Relatively, this is almost as high as Mount Everest. Next. So, and it's not just the height. Anthills are marvels of design, infinitely superior to anything that we have created. Their cities operate like a single organism, but it consists of many, many independent systems. I call it a meta system. Sustainable, it is the most sustainable thing that you will see. It is integrated. There's no wasteful duplication. Numerous chambers for specific purposes, as you can see in these drawings. It is aggregated use, aggregated demand for communal use. So you don't build multiples in every house, but it is communal use. They build intelligent cities that use resources very optimally. Next, Bantu. So this is an ant city, like this. In this image alone, there might be more individuals than people on our planet. It's incredible. Next, please. So what are the lessons we learn? There are many, many lessons. Let's just look at a few of them. So next, this is they build deeper, then higher. Many benefits, including safety from predators. It's higher than most, relatively higher than most of our hill stations, and deeper than the deepest mines in the world, and deeper than most of our oceans. They live in vertical spaces, not horizontal ones like us, and no urban sprawl. And these vertical spaces are incredibly complex, structurally sound, easily accessible, defined and designed for purpose. They are engineering marvels which have been achieved without blueprints, tools, construction machinery, without intercontinental or intercity supply chains, with total embedded knowledge in each individual's brain about its scope of work. There's no confusion, there's no labor or wage disputes. It's just an amazing design and construction process. By the way, let's talk about movement now in this slide. There's no mass transit here, buses, trains, and cars. It is walk to everywhere. There are no accidents. There's no conflict in movement. There are no red lights. There's no zebra crossing. There's a direct route to every destination, the shortest possible route. And that's possible only because of the vertical segregation of corridors, not horizontal networks like we believe in. There are expressways and exits, only one, direct to your destination. From the store in Delhi to a restaurant in Bangalore, only one entry into an expressway and one exit in Bangalore to the restaurant. I want to stay with this slide, Bantu, please, okay? I want to talk about transit-oriented development, which every single designer, planner talks about transit-oriented development, which means build a road first and do development around it. This is nonsense. I talk about development-oriented transit, which is you create the transit to where you do the development like the ants do. Next one, please. So let's talk about detail engineering design now. Removing the outside layer, you see this image, which is incredible structure that holds it all together. There are wind tunnels and ventilation form shafts that take in the air to the depth of the city. Depending upon the location, the anthill will be built for thermal comfort above ground and natural insulation below. They are designed for water drainage as well. And they use local raw material. This is way beyond anything that LEED rated certification buildings will do for you. Next, Batu. So let's take the most important one is of density, the use of land as a resource. And if in this image, which is 2.5 square meters of land, 1.6 meters above the ground, 500,000 ants live. The ant density here is 2 lakh ants per square meter. In urban human, if they are ant size, we would be less than 4 ants living here, and we would be 10 ants in this entire land area. So ant design efficiency is more than 50,000 times than human design efficiency. I'm talking about the lessons here, okay? Next, please. So, this is not a lecture on biology, but this is the lesson that we have to learn. If ants were to live like us, they would require 20 times the land area of the planet, even with their size. This is, about the density that we live in. If we continue to live the way we live, which is urban sprawl and stuff like that, we would be, in India alone, in the next 20 years, occupied 20% of the total arable land of India, if we continue to live the way we do. And you witnessed land versus food versus industry in West Bengal, the problems that happened over there. Just wait until you get this problem of food versus homes. The farmers around Delhi at the moment do not realize that this is about to happen. I made this presentation before I move on, but to hold this slide, please, before I move on, I made this presentation in Shanghai in 2008. I was invited a few times to visit Singapore to lecture the teams of BCA, which is Building Construction Authority, which is like the Urban Development Ministry or the regulative authority, to give them this presentation. This also led me as an entry into the Executive Council of the Green Growth Leaders, which Madhu spoke about. And I then became a designer of new cities. And then next, please. So this is Gujarat International Finance Tech City. I've left biology and I'm going to urban planning and design now. This is a city that was inspired by ants. This is located on the banks of the Sabarmati outside Ahmedabad. It is under construction. About 20% has been built already. Tragically, this was reduced in size due to the global financial crisis of 2009, but it is now declared as an example city in India. This was designed to house 6 lakh workers and 50,000 residents. This was designed by 452 designers who are planners, architects, engineers in my team, 11 nationalities, 8 countries, 43 design cells. Many, many, many lessons from ants and other species influence the design. So many elements with transport, waste management, energy use, etc. I got a one-line brief for this city from the client. He said, best city in the world. And that was the one-line brief that I got. Next, please, Madhu. Clearly, the client was very thrilled. I didn't tell him the ant story. He brought many people to my office, including his then boss, Advaniji. And cities was actually declared, as per his desire, the best designed city in the world in a global survey of 2013. Next. So let me look at some of the other lessons that we learned, not only verticality, but the mobility is one of the greatest lessons from ants, which I spoke about, development-oriented transit. We implemented it here. So the design ambitions here was anywhere to anywhere in 10 minutes. The surface land belongs to people, not to infrastructure and roads and traffic. And there will be zero conflict. All vehicular movement and parking would be below ground or elevated, which is vertically segregated like the ants do. Surface movement was only for police vehicles and fire services and any other emergency response. Next, please, Doctor. Now, this is what is called an origin-destination matrix. And this is of ants. This is how ants design their origin to destination matrix. If you view this in 3D, there is no conflict between these lines. There are no crossroads, there are no traffic lights, there are no zebra crossings, there's nothing. It is the shortest distance from where they have to go to where they have to go. Next, please. This is what we achieved in the best designed city in the world with global experts and with vertical segregation, which we learned from ants. But while there is still no conflict, there is congestion. So we were not able to match or come close to anywhere on mobility design as the ants do and have done for millennia. This is what we achieved on the right, which is the origin and destination matrix. And this, by the way, is the best in the world, but it is no patch to what you see on the left. Next, please. So the second lesson is to create vertical communities, because land is a resource which we have not begun to appreciate. Multiple systems, but one meta system, as I said earlier. Regrettably, regulations did not allow us to go more than 3 levels below. So this is a diamond tower in the city, which is the iconic building, 405 meters high, 88 floors. It is cut like a diamond because Surat in Gujarat cuts 90% of the world's diamonds. So each floor is a different floor plate, and this is cut like a diamond. Next, please. Nag is generally considered as the wealth protector. So these are 2 buildings that were designed in the shape of a cobra, a nag. The cantilever here that you see is 90 meters at that height, and there are 6 floors above it. This was a very, very challenging structural design. Next. DNA. From the minutest element in nature to a mega design. These were 3 buildings also in the same city that were designed in the form of DNA. Next, please. Now, here is salt crystals and the ocean. Why do we do this? Because the salt march began by Gandhiji from here, well, near here, from the Sabarmati ka Sant. So this was meant to be the largest convention and exhibition center in India. This is not yet built. I hope one day it gets built. It will be multiple size of Vigyan Bhavan or anything that you have. But this is from nature, from salt crystals and the ocean. Next, please. This is one of my favorite design cities that we did. This is a mega gambling city, nestled between the Caucasus and mountains and the Black Sea, with a 4-kilometer private beach. No cars. You travel on boats, pods, electric pods, and ropeways that are all vertically segregated and all electric. This did not get built. The government changed after we signed the agreement, c'est la vie. It happens in quite a few projects, and the new government wanted to prosecute the old government, which ran away to Ukraine. But as you can see on the left-hand side, lower left-hand side, the service departments were designed like a butterfly, as was this a central element in the city, which is also a butterfly with wings flapping. This was the convention center. And just below that, you see the museum, which is designed the way that water flows on a flat surface. That was the inspiration for this museum design. And below that, you see Pebbles, which was basically the health club and the spa. And of course, the most iconic thing that actually turned out in this was the Seahorse, which was a high-end gambling place for high-end players. So many elements were used in this city as well as in all the cities that we worked on. Next, please. This is a city that did not get built. This is a concept design that we did for a very large private urban development plan in Cheyur, Tamil Nadu, just short of Pondicherry. The developer could not raise the funds, again, due to the financial crisis. This tower, which we call the Paradise Tower, was meant to be 600 meters high, just a little, well, 200 or 300 meters short of the Burj Khalifa. This is unmistakable Anthill influence. Next, Bandhu. Now I'm going to come down to micro again. This is basically using pottery and what is called microalgae, which we all know as kai, to clean water in rural areas. It's a beautiful design. It's not ours. I had nothing to do with this wonderful design. The designers, the University College London, allowed me to use these images. It is a brilliant example of how simple, inexpensive design can impact the developing world and have a major social impact. This is now displayed in the Design Museum in London. Microalgae is the fastest growing plant in the world. It feeds on sunlight, carbon dioxide, and impurities in water. It cleans the water that flows over it or under it. I'm working with these guys on a design to use microalgae for carbon capture in one of my energy capture projects. Next, please. So, Lord Norman Foster. He's 85 years old. He is the most famous architect in the world, but he's not my favorite. But I like this line of his, which is absence of regulation leads to perfect order. By this, he means that if you're not even out of the box, but you don't have a box. So it's not in the box or out of the box design, but it's a design without a box. The person, I will tell you who's my favorite architect. That's Zaha Hadid, who died 3 years ago. She was an Iraqi lady. She did not believe in right angles. They called her Miss 89 in college, in architecture college, because she refused to use right angles. She perfected fluid architecture. The most expensive airport in the world, at $14 billion, just completed in Beijing, is inspired by an octopus, the arms of the octopus. Her simple vision there was get every passenger to the boarding gate in less than 10 minutes. I wish Indira Gandhi Airport in Delhi had done something like this, or Heathrow Airport in London, but it just had a simple ambition, which was get everybody to the boarding gate in 8 minutes. And by the way, if you find, any of you find a right angle in nature, I might buy you a drink. Next, please. So, happily, I have moved on from designing new cities on to other pursuits, no less exciting. Thank you for listening to me, and over to Purvi.
Thank you, Tauji. That was indeed a very fascinating presentation. And really, there's so much to learn from nature. So today, I will be sharing a little of my work in design thinking and its role in addressing complex social issues. My interest in this area was triggered by the Nirbhaya case in December 2012. Like most of the country and the world, I was really shaken by the incident and wanted to do something about it. So I started thinking about what could have helped Jyoti that night, considering her context, basically considering the city, the context, the situation. I looked at the fight or flight response, which is a very natural and instinctive reaction of our body. And interestingly, this response creates physiological changes in the body, like an increase in the heart rate, increase in rate of respiration, and skin conductance. So what if a wearable could capture the sudden change and instinctively know what a person needs and if the person needs help, to then communicate it to the safety circle or group of responders. So PP over here basically is for physiological parameters, which the patch, which is on the body, keeps collecting. And as soon as you find that the parameters have gone beyond a level that is expected, the person gets a message or a beep asking if they need help. And if they don't respond within a few seconds, a message is sent out to the user's community that they need help via SMS, email, and GPS, also with the GPS location of the person. So I initially pitched this idea at a startup weekend in Pittsburgh. It was really just an idea then. And it was the first time I ever pitched an idea, but it was an incredible experience. And the reason why I put up this slide is because I think the biggest outcome of that experience was that all the people who volunteered to work on the idea with me were from all parts of the world. We had someone from Colombia, from China, Nigeria, and of course, India. And also, it was just not women who wanted a solution, it was also men. So it just went to show that the problem was global, and so was the market. In 2017, I started a company called Hera Global Tech with my partner. And in 2018, we got through the semifinals of the Women's Safety Prize with a minimal viable product. Co-creation and getting feedback from the user is a very important part of Hera's process. This is done through online surveys, meetings, and discussing with people. In fact, even in developing the product, the company is working directly with the users. And now, in addition to safety, the product has also found use in drug rehabilitation drug rehabilitation patients. But I did feel that there was the need to really look at the problem in more depth to find a solution that was more long lasting. Like I just thought, I mean, the wearable is great and it does solve the problem to an extent, but I did feel that there's more scope for design in this area. So how can design help in such a situation? Somewhere I felt the root of the issue was not being addressed, and I decided to look into it through the lens of design thinking and contextual research. So for this, I undertook a 10-week research to see if I could design a framework for change on the issue of women's safety. This was mainly in and around Bangalore and included secondary research and primary research. A lot of, just walking around, observing, talking to people, seeing what's going on. And interestingly, there's lots of, art movements around this, as well as engagement with community to find the solution. So these were all learnings. Lots of interviews later, the patterns began to emerge. Research can be mind-boggling and overwhelming. This is basically a working wall where one throws up all that one has found out in the process of research to try and make sense of it. And to be honest, I find this really exciting. It is overwhelming, but it's very interesting because it's in finding the patterns that one feels sweet victory. And also the excitement of what one is going to uncover next. So through this process, one could see the underlying themes and patterns for the beliefs and values that drive the behavior. Usually, some of the insights are very obvious. Like we all know that the mindset and social conditioning are certainly two key factors of the problem. But the process of research also throws out, things which are not obvious. There are these subtle hints that you get along the way. And they provide interesting problems to reframe as opportunities. Like for instance, when I was talking to a few people who were visiting India for the first time, they mentioned that you don't see enough of police around for the amount of population. And just having visibility of police might create, might make people, might make people, not do something wrong, which was a very interesting insight. The other one, again, through my process of research, a lot of people, I mean, most of the people did not trust the system. They didn't feel safe or comfortable going to the police at all. Where one person said, you know what, I think it's the perception of the police. It's not that the police is bad, but it's just that they're perceived to not be helpful. So how can we use design to change how the police is perceived by the public? Again, in India, with the population we have, there's so many people on the streets all the time. So this was in Bangalore then, where the elections were close. And we had these huge cutouts of politicians and really overbearing. And this is just one of the things one sees. You also see things like movie posters and all kinds of art on the walls. To think that we do spend so much time on the roads, can design be used to create an impact through what messages we send on the roads? This was another interesting insight. So as part of the process, I do look for a lot of feedback because I believe in the process of co-creation and constantly talking to people so that I can remove my biases. So on one Uber shared drive home, I spoke to a girl who is a volunteer with Teach for India. And she would go to communities which were not very, I mean, they didn't have enough. And she spoke about how safety is such a problem there. So it's the rich who can afford to have security guards and live a safe life. But what about the rest of the community? And if we don't design keeping them in mind, then the problem will never, close, it'll never die. So when you design, one has to consider the entire community and how can we use design there to create safer communities for everyone? This was yet another interesting insight. So we see so much work has been done for girls, and which is great because it was needed. But at the same time, one finds a lot of young boys, especially from grade 5 onwards, really not knowing what to do with their lives. And when I spoke to the founder of Parikrama, a school over here, she did mention that from class 4 and 5 onwards, until class 4 and 5, the kids are very academically inclined, the boys, they're doing very well. But from class 5 onwards, they get into bad company, whether it be drugs or stealing. So that's actually the time phase where they need to be really molded, and kind of that's where the design can come in to support boys and young men to make better choices. And finally, this is also something we spoke about in the last session, that if one goes to see, most of the programs that we have are either women run or they're victim focused. So we need to probably make this space more inclusive. We need to get more, why don't we even look at the perpetrators? What are the issues that perpetrators might have that they are dealing with, and how do we look at addressing those through a design perspective? How do we make programs more engaging to include everyone? And how do we bring more men into this conversation? And how can design be used here? So I think what's really interesting about design is that it spreads across disciplines, like across graphic design, visual communication, product design. And that's why it's a tool that can be applied in a very holistic way to address the problem. So basically the outcome of this research, I did go into the ideation process and looked at different possibilities and shared them with a group of people, with many people, for constant feedback, which is a part of the design thinking process. So that especially with the user, like you have to show your work to the user and get feedback, and you have an idea about what's working and what's not working. So the outcome of it was that most people thought that education in this area, like gender sensitization, would be a very one of the strongest tools to really overcome the problem. And if it were imparted in schools and at workplaces, one might see a change in this generation and or hopefully the next generation. So the hypothetical prototype or the outcome of this process was an organization called ACOM, which didn't believe in the, it believed in the balance of both the genders and empowering both the genders rather than just one. And it would impart programs in gender sensitization, which would also include a lot of the other insights that were gathered through the process of engaging programs and bringing art into it. This model basically represents how it would be holistic. So if one would get the profit from educational institutions and organizations, that would also be spent towards building it in the communities. So I think it's a more holistic approach, because that was again from the insight that I got from one of the persons who said we have to build for the entire community. So looking at a model which is not just, it's more inclusive and holistic. And this is just an idea about how this would span out the first year to the 5th year to 20 years. So again, over here, even in this process of just trying out the program in the first year, one would go back to ideate again if it didn't work out. So when I spoke about design not being a linear process and going back and forth, the first year would basically be the trial and error, where one might have to go back to the user and research, or one might have to go back to the idea and ideate more, or one might have to go back to the prototype and redevelop it more. Only after, I think, such iterations would one have a product that would be successful. And coming back to the company, what if companies like Hera Global Tech included this model in their organization? Even though it's defeating their market, I think in a larger scope, it is solving a pretty complex social issue. And I think that's the need of the day today. So with that, that's it, folks. That's where this session ends. And we can have question and answers.
Urvi, that was fantastic. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Madhu, you want to take over the Q&A?
I think we shall, as the panel questions are asked, we should proceed. Everyone is open. The panel is now open. The event is open now, Q&A. Anyone wants to ask any questions?
Come on, family.
We have put a couple of questions in the chat box also.
Okay.
Some of them have been answered, some are yet to be answered. So if I may begin, Ranu Chacha, by putting the first question to you.
Okay.
So, it was very, very fascinating, what you presented before us. But I was just trying to think whether in schools of architecture and, curricula in architecture and all that, they actually use this kind of method of looking at nature and looking at beehives and anthills and stuff like that. And if they don't, why don't they? Why is it that we run after brick and mortar and we run after all kinds of glitzy stuff?
You're exactly right. And no, they don't teach this in architecture schools. The most famous architecture school in India at the moment is SPA. I think Kamna went to SPA, Raju, or yeah. So they don't teach these things. But yes, there is biomimicry that is done, but I haven't come across anybody using ants as an example. I don't know how it came to me, but I did a lot of research over 10 years ago. And they're an amazing species. They are so much more advanced than us. There was so many lessons. No, they don't. And the other thing I spoke about was the transit-oriented development, which everybody talks about. It is utter nonsense. You build what you need to build and connect it with transit, not build transit first and make squares and red lights and stuff like that, and then build buildings along the corridor. That is nonsense. But every architecture school will teach you transit-oriented development. Everything that we did was the complete opposite, which was development-oriented transit.
Why do you think that is done, Ranu? What could be the logic of basing it on transit-oriented teaching?
Veena Gigi, there is a lot of convention. For example, all our roads are equal to what the Romans had built, which was the width of 2 horses' asses, because their carriages, chariots had to ride on those on the road, and they were built as wide as 2 horses' asses. Until today, every lane in every city development is the same width. So a lot of this is just convention that keeps on getting repeated. There is no design thinking in a lot of these things. So until somebody comes along and says, well, we're going to have flying cars, which by the way will come in Dubai next year, you don't need roads and you don't need these lanes. You know, so things have to change. It is, people are too conservative. They don't want to go out on a limb, and they design everything that has been designed for centuries. Having the same parameters. That's what I meant.
Question for the panel. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, we should go ahead.
What I want to ask you is that it's good to ideate and conceptualize a design, but a very important part of it is execution. So what are the impediments that one encounters in execution of a design, or or fulfillment of a project? On that, could you share some thoughts? Do we have a conducive environment in the country to which encourages designers in the execution of their ideas and plans? Like Ranu, you have shown beautiful pictures of and concepts of great cities built on anthill concepts, etc. But what was your experience regarding execution?
Right.
And the same question applies to Siddharth and Purvi. And Chand, of course, is actually a driving force, in encouraging designers to execute their plans. But do you feel that in India you have sufficient incentives for designers to execute their ideas and plans? Speaking of Gift City, I am very close to the Gift City. I was associated with the project also for some time as an advisor. But I found that the progress there has been extremely tardy. I mean, such a beautiful design on paper, but execution will take, I don't know, ages. The riverfront that you're showing, waterfront, it's just not there as of now. So
this is a perennial challenge. And by the way, there is always a conflict between the architects and the engineers. The architect create beautiful designs, and the engineers say we can't build it because it is too difficult. And this struggle keeps on going all the time. But the most important thing is government regulations and approval process of these things. But it is changing. Like I took the example of Zaha Hadid and this airport in Beijing. There is no regulation anywhere in the world that would normally allow that unless the government decides, okay, I want this purpose, I want this ambition, let's remove the regulations and let's build it. So to answer your question very briefly, it is happening and it is changing, and new concepts are coming in urban development. And as I said, Zaha Hadid is one of the pioneers who's made this happen. So to answer your question on urban planning, that's it. But Purvi and Bantu, you could go and talk about implementation in your fields.
So I think design thinking actually has been applied and used by a lot of companies, including Google, Apple, IBM, and it's a very successful process. In fact, if there's any product that you see in terms of even an app that you use these days, if you find an app really works, it is, I would think that they are using the process there where they're keeping the user as a, in the center. So, and I also think what Chand Bhaiya said, how companies are really applying this process of thinking. I think the ecosystem is quite good as of now to create products with this mindset. And even one finds it getting, more encouragement in schools and educational institutions. So it's just a matter of time before it kind of tips over. I think it'll be great if the government also has some programs so that they appreciate the process. That's one thing I find, like especially in India, um, uh, it's just a way of thinking and problem solving, and it really makes you look at things in a way of what can be done better in this situation. So I'd strongly recommend that it be taught throughout. Yeah.
May I add onto this? The process of design, as Purvi and Siddharth brought it out, consists of one, empathy, that is empathizing, and feedback, and repeated feedback, going back, find out what the user or the ultimate beneficiary wants. It is not architecture or product which is important, it's the process. And this process is the process of thinking and an emotional process. Now we find this missing across not only India, but everywhere else, because ultimate user is often forgotten. Take any debate which you see, whether it's a farmer's agitation or economic, do we ever think about what are we trying to achieve and what does the user want? That is what Purvi mentioned, and that process of what does the user want, and if we do this, will we do what he wants or make something completely different? That is designing, that is thinking about design, and that is the essence of the whole thing. And the solutions might surprise everyone, including yourself or the designer himself. Am I right, Purvi?
Yes, Bhai Saab, very, very properly, very rightly put, yeah.
So that is what we have to do.
I just had a point here, when you talked about empathy and, may I just come in for a second?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I just had this point, just to flip it on the other side, something that we all use, something that is so ubiquitous. A lot of us have these iPhones, and Steve Jobs used to say that, customers don't actually know what they want. So he never believed in focus groups, and he never believed in any of these things. And a lot of his phones were designed without any customer input at all, really. It was more of it was, I'm forgetting the name of the designer he had, but a lot of it was based on their thinking. And therefore, sometimes, I think the standard line that he used to use is that customers actually don't know what they want. And therefore, some of the most fantastic products that we have been designed by, designed without the customer input. The other angle also is coming back to a computer programming angle. Some of the languages that we've sort of used, computer programming languages like BASIC, C++, all of these have their basic kernel designed by an individual who really didn't go and take people's inputs per se. He felt he had a problem and he sort of tried to solve it. Whereas some of the worst computer programming languages like COBOL, which is so difficult to program in, was developed by a committee. So sometimes, I feel that design, having a structured process or having the kind of structure that you're trying to build around that may not always work. And just to supplement Ranu Tauji on the anthill, just to match what Papa said and Ranu Tauji said, you can look at it, where Papa said that implementation doesn't happen in time. Anthills, the life, what is the typical, while Ranu Tauji tried to compare the size of an ant with the anthill, what is the lifespan of an average ant? So my understanding is that apart from the queen ant, the lifespan of an ant is typically a few days, I think, and maybe the worker ants maybe a little more than that, and the queen lives the longest. But so you look at the anthills have actually been developed over several lifetimes. Let's hope Gift City doesn't become something like that, but I think that is another perspective that one needs to take, that the anthill didn't happen overnight. It's just 1 foot. I think it's just 1 foot in a year that gets made. So it's over several lifetimes that you've got that anthill there. that's just
Wow,
just two
you've done
perspectives.
some research as well. Great.
Ranu, I would like to ask a question. This is Gopal here. I'd like to ask a question to Purvi. Can I?
Go ahead.
Yes, Tauji.
Okay. So Purvi, first thing is that I must congratulate you for even thinking of applying a design thinking concept to this critical social issue, which I call as a pandemic globally.
Thanks, Tauji.
Congratulations on that. Now,
Thank
the
you.
other thing which I want to share with you is that even before you reach the stage of ideation, right? There are too many external stakeholders in your kind of an issue or an initiative that you have taken. I would like to know your experiences in handling and connecting with those stakeholders which are external, which are most likely to have some impact in your initiative, right? Now, what has been your experience in success in your connecting with the stakeholders, which are very critical in this area? Just want to get your views on this.
So you're talking about the product, Tauji, or the research after that?
As
Both.
part of your research, I'm sure you would have also thought of the external stakeholders to solve this problem through the design thinking concept, which is the government body, the women empowerment areas, right? Your legal system, which is into play in this.
Yeah. So to be honest, Tauji, this was a 10-week research that I undertook, and it was basically to understand the problem at its core. I didn't look as part of the research. I didn't go into things like, you know, what are the legal issues and what about the police also in depth, because that is a totally different ball game, which needs years and years to
It's a
figure out. But
difficult area.
I spoke to Garima Didi, and she gave me an idea about, you know, what are the issues. It's about basically these bodies not working in tandem together. And also, I didn't even look at perpetrators or what might be like, you know, even I think abusers and all. I didn't look into that part in the research. It was more in the secondary research that I figured that out. So only because of the time limit, and I also didn't want to go there at this point of time. It was more to understand it from a social perspective. What are the underlying issues?
Okay, thank you.
But yeah.
You raised your hand, Vaishali?
Yeah, I did. I raised my hand. So what I wanted to say was, Purvi, brilliant, so well thought, and you know, everybody's presentations were amazing. You know, there's an organization called Safety Pin, which is based out of Delhi, run by Kalpana. And I was working with her as a part of a Safe City program we were planning in Gurgaon this year, but because of COVID, we couldn't implement it. But I think you should definitely get in touch with her to take your program forward, because she has an app for safety in you know, in different parts of actually not only India but the world. She works for the UN, etc. So it'll be great. And then she's connecting with policymakers to answer Gopal Mama's question, and the government and cops, etc., and corporates. So it'll be great for you to also perhaps engage on the safety part of you know.
Sure, Didi. Yeah, thanks so much. But I do want to share something. So we were speaking to this victim safety organization in Pittsburgh, and through our conversation, we thought, what if we tipped it over? Like, instead of creating a device for a person who might be in threat, what if we created something for someone who can't control their anger and know exactly when they need to kind of back up? Because a lot of these, you know, events happen with anger in the US, especially, you know, it's a lot of rage. So, and it's not that people don't want to work on it. So how can we kind of tip it to the other side and not only look at the victim, but also look at how we can help perpetrators or people who need help to kind of reduce the problem?
Any more questions from anybody?
Chacha, I want to respond to some of the comments that have been made. Vishy Chacha asked the question about the implementation of projects and how do you sort of get around that. And one of the techniques that is now, well, I shouldn't say now, or has been used more effectively from an sustained perspective, and I'm sure it's prevalent in many other parts of the world, is that right when you're forming the teams that take part in the design thinking process, they do come from cross-functional backgrounds. So the engineers, the marketing guys, the business guys, the admin guys, they all come together into that formation of the initial teams that do the design thinking process, which means that the buy-in from these departments is already there. So the passing the baton of, if you're running a relay of, let's, I've done the design, now let's give it to the engineers and see what they say, and then they throw it back to you, and then you go back and forth, and the good old Indian jugaad kicks in. That doesn't happen. You start getting the checks and balances at each stage as you go along. Of course, there are issues like, but I mean, there is bureaucracy. There are issues here from an industry perspective, and I do think that there are some industries that are more susceptible to lethargy in progress and implementation. Aged care is one sector that is quite severely affected by funding in Australia. It has some of the largest problems, but that issue still plagues in that sort of field. Someone made a comment about Steve Jobs and how he would design products, and my take on that is slightly different. I admire people like Jobs and Musk and those sort of guys, but those guys are and were visionaries. They were not designers. They created a vision, they built a story, and they gave it to their team to realize it. In fact, if you look at Amazon, they have a concept called 100 product launches every day. They'll launch, and these are not 100 Amazon products every day. These are 100 new features on the Amazon platform every single day. And so there are many design sprints that happen on a daily basis. There are teams that work on a daily basis, and they have to launch 100 new products. This could be something as simple as a new click button, or a new search option, or a new way to show images on your Amazon platform. There's numerous ways to do that. So organizations do that on a regular basis in terms of mini design sprints. And the third thing I was going to say was that when one of the other things that I do as a part of my my activities here is that I mentor a lot of startups. And so sometimes when new ideas like what Purvi's been working on, the incredible work that she's doing, is that there are these concepts of hackathons where you actually, over a weekend, you start something, and on a Friday afternoon, and by Sunday evening, you have an almost go-to-market ready product. So the whole idea of failing fast, failing quickly, rapid ideation, all of those sort of things happen so quickly because the first assumption that everybody makes is that this is going to fail. So the comfort level of failing something and learning from that is always accepted as the first step, as compared to with the assumption that this is going to work and then feeling disappointed. So the first step is, this is going to fail, let's fail it. And if it doesn't fail, great, that's a good outcome. If it fails, at least we know we should not be doing this anymore, and let's transfer something else. So the approach is slightly different.
Sorry.
Yeah, any
No,
other questions?
Ranu, I just asking Bantu one question. I mean, you said Bantu that they were visionaries, not designers. But being a visionary, doesn't it imply that later you become a designer to you implement your vision?
Potentially, but I think I would say that in the early stages of Steve, I mean, if you talk about Steve Jobs specifically, he certainly was the guy who was behind the whole Apple story. But then he was a thinker, he was a dreamer, he was the one who sold the story. And then he had a whole army of people behind him who sort of moved the machinery forward. So yes, the first Apple, or the first Mac, or the first iPod, or the first of many, was the vision, was the dream, and he sort of pulled the market forward. But now that these big guys have got the MAGA, the Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Alibaba, have sort of got that momentum going, that it sort of just moves along.
So guys, I think we've already crossed now 2 hours on this session. So with your permission, I want to just make a couple of statements before winding up. First of all, Purvi, thank you so much. Bantu, thank you so much. You both were very, very inspirational. Chand and me, old fogies, we sorry, Chand. Okay, but these two were
But very inspiring, very telling.
okay. So, oh, by the way, Namita, you raised a question about the new Parliament House and stuff.
Yes.
I'm not going to comment on that except to say that Lutyens was an idiot. Okay, he was an amateur.
So we'll go to a pub and discuss this, okay?
He was an amateur and he got the assignment only because he was having an affair with the Governor General's wife. And that's one way to get government projects, by the way. All right. So he was an idiot, complete idiot, and the design was flawed in great detail. But anyway, so thank you so much. I think we had a great session. I just want to, as usual, announce the next three. Oh, and Madhu, by the way, you said I want to work for another 2 years. Just tell us, 20 years. All right. And so the next three sessions. On the 27th of December, we're going to have a lighter session on cinema, Bollywood and Hollywood. And this would be a great way to end an awful year and look forward to the next year. So, and that will be led by Raju. I can't think of a better person to do that than Raju. And by the way, that session will have some of my generation also, because I was the only Gen 2 in this particular session. There'll be some more Gen 2 people in that session. So 27th of December, Raju with cinema, Hollywood, Bollywood. And I assure you it'll be very interesting. January, we have rescheduled something so that it won't be after 2 weeks because of some other problems. But on the 17th of January, it'll be Gogi, who will be leading a discussion on skills. And that is extremely relevant now. So that will be on the 17th of January. And then on the 7th of February, we will be having a session on entrepreneurship led by Sumant and a couple of other interesting people. So these are the three sessions: 27th, cinema; 17th of January, Gogi; and 7th of February, Sumant. So that's it, guys. I think we had a great session today. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bhaiya, one thing I would like to say, because my presentation is coming up on the 27th.
Okay.
So there's only one thing, family members, that I will be giving a presentation along with a couple of other people. And I have planned a family quiz on that evening. And it is my earnest request that the quiz which I am making, of course, will be there. But I would request each member who is going to attend that FDG should have one question related to films and entertainment ready with them. So I leave the question to you, and please think of a good question so that everybody can answer and participate.
Then we'll all win the quiz. Then we'll all win the quiz, no?
Fine, no problem. We want you to win.
पढ़ के आना पड़ेगा राजू चाचा.
Yes. Don't think that quiz is going to be very light. Like, who is Deepika Padukone's father?
That I know, Prakash Padukone.
अच्छा राजू, ये बताओ कि questions कब भेज रहे हो?
Questions cannot be sent. They will be asked then and there. It will be an audio visual affair.
अरे तो फिर हम आंसर कैसे लगा के रखेंगे?
That answering will be given to you. The mode of answering will be shared by me to you.
अच्छा, okay.
Ramu Chacha, there is one request that when you do the Kurwar diaries too, then you must incorporate things like chane pani and phaleri aloo, etc., because those are also dying traditions.
By the way, that is on the agenda, not Kurwar session, but family recipes.
Okay.
That will happen a few months later. Chand and I have discussed that, and that is also going to happen. By the way, last sentence from me. Madhu, thank you so much for coordinating this and introducing all of us. And that was a great start to the session. Okay.
Thank you.
Madhu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Madhu,
Thank you.
panelists.